Jonah's life was painted in golden color from the moment he was born. His family was one of wealth, influence, and privilege, a legacy built by generations before him and handed down like an inheritance he'd always known would be his. His father, a respected businessman, taught him the value of hard work and ambition, while his mother, a devoted socialite, introduced him to the elite circles of society. Growing up, Jonah's future seemed certain. He was the lion cub destined to inherit his family's kingdom, groomed for success and destined for greatness. But behind the glamour, Jonah's soul craved something different. In secondary school, he discovered a new path, a path that felt exhilarating, dangerous, and intoxicating. A group of friends introduced him to a life of thrill-seeking, parties, and rebellion. He took his first drink, tried his first drug, and suddenly, his life became a series of adrenaline-charged nights. The world was a playground, and the rules seemed made to be broken. He felt invincible, convinced he could walk the line between his family's expectations and his newfound freedom. What started as a weekend thrill quickly turned into a habit. Soon, Jonah's priorities shifted. His mind was no longer focused on academics, dreams, or ambitions. Instead, he was consumed by the need for the next high. His grades slipped, and warnings from teachers began piling up. But each time, he brushed them off with a smile, convinced that his family's wealth would shield him from any real consequences. After all, he was the lion's cub, and nothing could truly harm him. When Jonah entered university, he plunged even deeper into his vices. The freedom of campus life meant fewer restrictions, fewer questions, and no one watching over his shoulder. He began missing classes, ignoring assignments, and treating exams as a nuisance rather than an opportunity. His professors grew concerned, and his family was notified. But each time he was questioned, Jonah had an excuse, a smile, or a promise that he'd do better next time. His family became increasingly worried. They knew something was wrong, but they couldn't quite grasp the depth of Jonah's descent. Hoping to help him, they enrolled him in counseling and therapy, urging him to refocus on his studies and get back on track. When counseling failed, they arranged for him to enter a rehabilitation program. Jonah went, but he wasn't ready to change. He found ways to escape, each time returning to the same dangerous habits. After every failure, his family clung to hope, desperate to believe that Jonah would find his way. They enrolled him in new universities, hoping that a fresh start would make a difference. But each new beginning ended the same way. He was expelled, once, then again, due to drug use and erratic behavior. His family's influence could only protect him so much, and eventually, they were forced to confront the reality they had tried so hard to deny. When they could no longer protect him, Jonah's family made a difficult decision. They were forced to confront the reality they had tried so hard to deny. They cut him off financially, hoping that the lack of resources would force him to change. But by then, Jonah was too deeply ensnared by addiction. Without money, he resorted to selling everything he owned. Clothes, electronics, personal mementos, all were sacrificed to feed his growing dependency. Even when there was nothing left to sell, Jonah's desperation only grew. His days were spent chasing a high, drifting from one fix to the next, sinking deeper into the shadows. Jonah became unrecognizable, a hollow shell of the young man he once was. But the need for drugs drove him further, leading him down darker paths. Stealing became a new means of survival, a way to satisfy his addiction when money was gone. He would sneak into houses, break into cars, take anything he could sell. It didn't matter who he hurt or what he lost. The drugs had become the only thing he lived for. Over time, Jonah's life spiraled into violence. He was caught stealing several times, beaten by those he tried to rob, and still, he didn't change. His family watched helplessly, their hopes crushed as they realized how far he had fallen. The young man who once held so much promise had become a stranger, lost in a world they couldn't reach. Then came the night when Jonah crossed an unforgivable line. In a haze of drugs and desperation, he assaulted a young woman. It was a moment of cruelty, an action he could never take back. This time, there was no escaping the consequences. He was arrested, and his crime shocked the community. The court sentenced Jonah to 15 years in prison. His family tried everything in their power to reduce the sentence, hiring lawyers, pleading for leniency, but nothing could erase the weight of his actions. Jonah's fate was sealed, and he was left to face the wreckage of his life alone. In the silence of his prison cell, Jonah was confronted with the truth he had spent years avoiding. Stripped of his freedom, his friends, his wealth, he had nothing left but his memories and regrets. The highs he once chased, the friends he thought would last forever, the life he'd taken for granted, all had vanished, leaving only the cold reality of his choices. Days turned into months, and Jonah began to feel the weight of his past settle on him like a heavy shroud. He remembered his family's hopes, the dreams they had once shared with him, the future he had been destined for. His father's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of the responsibilities he'd abandoned. His mother's tears haunted him, a reminder of the pain he'd caused those who loved him most. Jonah knew that he had wasted every opportunity, every privilege he'd been given. Instead, he had thrown away his birthright for fleeting pleasures and hollow highs. Now, he was left with only the empty echo of what might have been. A life of success, respect, and purpose that he had discarded in pursuit of illusions. Alone in his cell, Jonah finally understood the depth of his loss. He was no longer a prince, no longer a son, no longer the young man his family had once believed in. Jonah began to wonder if redemption was possible, if he could one day find a way to make amends for the pain he had caused. He knew the road would be long, filled with regret and the weight of his choices, but perhaps in time, he could find a path to peace. For now, he was left with his memories and the silent reminder of the lion he had once been, a lion that had never become a king, but who, perhaps, might one day learn to live with the scars he had carved into his own soul. If you enjoyed this real-life story, please subscribe to our channel for more.